So just for those people who perhaps haven't been to any of our webinars before, our wellbeing webinars, we're Platform Wellbeing. We are a social enterprise arm of Platform, the mental health and social change charity, which is based in South Wales. Platform Wellbeing is made up of a team of psychologists, training experts and counsellors, and we provide training around mental health, workplace wellbeing support and counselling to organisations and individuals across the UK. We also provide training and counselling in the education space, and we offer reflective practice / clinical supervision across multiple sectors. So today we will be talking about anxiety. We know anxiety is a big subject. 8 million people in the UK experience anxiety, and burnout and stress are costing industries over £70 million a year in sick days. So it's a very topical subject. I know it was the subject of last year's Mental Health Awareness Week as well. So we often hear about wellbeing initiatives such as mental health, first aid training, mindfulness, wellbeing apps, all focus at that kind of individual level to help tackle the rising levels of anxiety. But we hear less about interventions that look at the causal reasons behind why we're having these higher anxiety rates. Things like the high workload, stress, poor line management, lack of support. So today we're going to be hearing from Dr. Sian Williams, our head of training and delivery, and she's going to be discussing what anxiety is, but she's also going to be looking at it within the context of the workplace and the role that the employers play. And then we'll be joined by Pete Johnson, who is our commercial director, but today he joins us as someone who's going to be bravely sharing his own story of living with anxiety. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to pass you over to Sian.
Thank you, Helen. Bear with me while I just find my screen. Oh, can everyone see that? Perfect. Great. So I just wanted to start with a bit of a definition about what anxiety is. What is it we're going to be talking about today? So anxiety it's a natural response. It's something we all have, and it's a response to pressure. So it's a response to feeling afraid or threatened, and it can show up in how we feel physically, mentally, but also in how we behave and the things that we do. So anxiety is a response to our circumstances, the things that are happening around us, but it's also a response that happens within us. So it's a response that happens within our nervous system. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the nervous system, and hopefully you can see my next slide. Okay. So this is a model taken from polyvagal theory, and I'm not going to go into the ins and outs of that today because we'll be here all morning. But it's a nice representation of what anxiety looks like and how it works. So if you see this green area down here, I'm pointing with my mouse. Can you see my mouse? Is that working? Great. So this green area down here is a place where we feel safe. So we are regulated, we feel connected with other people, we feel quite safe. We're able to be curious and open and compassionate, and we feel like we're in the moment. Yeah, we're quite grounded. So it's a nice place to be. And from a kind of workplace perspective, if we're down here, that's fab. But no one is down here all the time. You'll see this kind of wavy line here. And what this demonstrates is sometimes we'll be regulated, and sometimes we'll be up in this kind of red zone. So this red zone is what's known as the fight-flight kind of response zone. So this is when our sympathetic nervous system is activated. And I'm sure many of you are super familiar with fight and flight already. So it's when we experience a threat and we either surge of adrenaline and we either run away from it, or we approach it head on and we fight it. And this is when you start to experience things like anxiety, worry, concern, fear, those kind of feelings. It's a higher level of arousal than we would have down here. And it's worth noting that this kind of line is going to be different for everybody. So some people will have a wavy line that sits right here. Some people might be a little bit lower down. Some people might be a little bit higher up. So if people have experienced lots of threats over the course of their lifetime, live in a position of adversity, it might be actually that their arousal level is higher. And so there's kind of everyday threats that we're going to talk about throughout this webinar cause spikes that are higher up here rather than sitting on this line, and potentially even into this blue zone, which is a point where we experience kind of overwhelm and shut down, and things like we start to see burnout, and we're reaching crisis point up here. So I just want everyone to remember that I'm going to be talking about kind of the workplace in this setting, but you can't separate workplace from the rest of people's lives. So just bear in mind that actually some of the stresses that we're going to talk about might be different for different people within that context. It's considered depending on what else is going on. Okay, but anxiety itself is not bad. So imagine you are this giraffe. If you didn't experience any anxiety as this giraffe, you're not gonna do very well. So it's anxiety that means when a lion turns up, the giraffe doesn't just stand there and get eaten. It runs away. Yeah, pegs it until it's safe. Flight is activated, gets itself to safety, and then regulated back down into that nice green zone that we were talking about earlier. It's also anxiety that spurs the giraffe into action to protect its offspring if there's a threat to its offspring. Fight is activated, giraffe acts to a point of safety, and then it regulates back down into its green area. So anxiety is not the bad guy. Just wanted to make that clear from the start. It's a useful emotion that means when there's a threat, we have the energy and the arousal to take action. So useful for the giraffe, but also useful for us. I know if a lion comes at me, I wanna run away. But also it's this kind of anxiety arousal state that means when we've got an exam coming up, we put in the effort, we do the revision, or if you've got a webinar on anxiety to do, you do some prep and you make sure you're prepared for that upcoming task. So anxiety can be useful at times. So where's the balance, right? I've spoken about anxiety as being something that can tip us into a state of overwhelm, but also it's something that can be quite useful, and that can be quite useful from a performance point of view as well. So if we think about work performance, or performance in general, actually, and pressure and stresses and threats and anxiety, we get this nice curve. This is going to be a PowerPoint filled with curved graphs, I'm afraid. So if we have zero pressure, and sure, maybe there's nothing to get stressed about, it might think we're in that nice green zone, but actually we find ourselves in a place of boredom. We're not stimulated, we don't necessarily feel particularly connected, and our performance isn't great because there's nothing spurring us on, there's nothing to motivate action. But actually, I think anyone who's ever been in a job where they're bored out their mind will tell you it's also not a good place for your mental health and well-being. So we don't want to be down here with nothing spurring us on. Add a little bit of pressure and we're in a more comfortable place. We're in a position where everything feels manageable. We've got enough going on so that we're motivated, but nothing's pushing us too far. Add a bit more and we find ourselves in this stretch zone. So this is the position now where we think about thriving. So actually we're growing, we're developing, we're being pushed, but we're also being supported. So we have the resources we need to be able to to develop and grow and thrive. And that's fantastic. That's where we want to be, right? We know that being in work is generally good for people's mental health. And this is kind of why, yeah, this place where you feel like you're developing and growing and competent is really, really good for our mental health. Push that too far and we end up in strain. And we'll all be in here at stages. Demands happen, and that's okay. As long as we can find the balance and we can get back to this stretch zone where we're still able to take care of ourselves as well as manage the work that we've kind of got mounting up. If we can't look after ourselves, we end up focusing too much on the demands and they kind of get on top of us. We end up heading down, oh, sorry, too soon, dipping into this position of overwhelm. And this is where we start to see things like burnout. We see people needing time off work, and we see high levels of staff turnover and productivity, performance drops. Yeah, people burn out, they're unable to keep going at the level they were up here. Because if we can't look after ourselves as well as look after our jobs, we can't do the job either. It gets to a point where we run out. So I wanted to share with you this nice little table that I borrowed from Bath University. They put this together. But it's a really nice just little diagram that I think highlights the point between thriving, which we know is great, and excellence, which sounds brilliant. But again, it's a very delicate place to be. So pretty obvious we don't want to be at crisis point. We don't want to be feeling really anxious. We don't want to have low mood. We don't want kind of our body to catch up with us in sickness. And this is not a good place to be. Nor is struggling, nor is unsettled. This is all kind of that red, blue zone that we're talking about at the very, very start. So fight, flight, overwhelm, too much. Thriving is a great place. We're effective, we're efficient, we're building our confidence. We're still able to look after ourselves, we're eating healthily, sleeping well, we're still socially connected outside of work, we're engaged with not only what we're doing in work, but with our hobbies and the things that make us outside of work. Tip into excellence, and it sounds brilliant, and it is brilliant to excel for a period. You can be in flow, you can feel like you're really developing to the best of your ability, you're solution focused, you feel dynamic. But if you're not able to keep up some of this self-care stuff and you become completely immersed in the job and what you're doing in your work time, you find that you become the job almost. It becomes part of who you are and your identity, and that's unsustainable. And again, you end up in crisis, in burnout, and you actually just do full circle back to this red zone where we said we didn't want to be. So I don't know why this is here. Think about this nice nervous system graph again. If we think about where we are on here as people, I think I'm missing a slide, sorry. I might have to go back and forth. This is the one I was looking for. Sorry, bear with me 1 second. Right, we'll pick up here. Okay, so we've spoken about excellence, we've spoken about thriving, we've spoken about burnout. What does that look like in a work context? So there are a number of things that we know contribute to workplace anxiety. So things like having lots and lots of deadlines that we have to meet. Anyone who's ever experienced a deadline, leading up to a deadline is a time of pressure, right? We feel that threat, we act in response. If those deadlines are relentless, it's hard to find a way back into that place where we can look after ourselves as well as our job. Things like working long hours, experience of workload that's overly high, having like a direction on tasks, so feeling a bit lost, like you don't know what you're supposed to be doing or where you're supposed to be taking it, feeling like things are unfair, feeling like you don't have any control over your work and the environment you're working in. Also things like relationships. So if there's conflict at work, if it's you're having a difficulty managing a member of staff, or you're having difficulty with your line manager, those things can also contribute to feelings of anxiety. And feeling like we're judged on our performance or we're criticised for our failure can be a source of stress. And these are things that the research has identified as being correlated with anxiety at work. So if we think about what this means in terms of our nervous system, so my graph's the other way around, sorry. They're the things that will tip you into that red zone, into that blue zone. And what that means for us as individuals is that we find ourselves triggered by one of those things. We're activated, our threat system's up, we start to act. And if that doesn't go away, if those threats keep coming, those demands keep coming, we start to the point where we feel overwhelmed. And it's unsustainable. And so it feels like a catastrophe. We can't do it anymore. As humans, we're really good at getting ourselves to this point. Our nervous system responds to threat pretty readily, pretty quickly, so we can get to this point of overwhelm quite quickly. We're not so good at bringing ourselves back down, to realize what the threat is, what's driving it, why we're feeling like this, to rationalize it and to resolve the threat. This is something we need other people to help us with. We are social beings, and by connecting with other people, we're able to do these things, but it's really, really hard for us to do on our own. So what does that mean for the workplace? Well, it means there are a few things that we can do as employers, as colleagues, as organisations. Firstly, we should prioritise the person over the performance. If we don't do this, if we don't put people before the jobs that they're doing, we begin to see that self-worth and value can begin to get tied up in what people are able to do. So we feel like it's called contingent self-worth. So I'm only valued if I can do my job. And that's a huge sense of pressure. It's the kind of thing that will drive presenteeism, working the long hours, pushing more and more and more, getting to that, or trying to get to that excelling point, which is unsustainable. It drives perfectionism and all of these kind of unhealthy traits that don't do anything for our mental health. We need empathy in the workplace. So we know that feeling understood, feeling connected and validated in itself is a good way to reduce feelings of anxiety and distress in general. So just having that person to connect with, having someone to voice those feelings to, actually physically has an impact on our nervous system regulation. Building trust. So a workplace where there is trust among employees and among kind of leadership and workforce means that people feel able to seek help when they need it, to talk about what's difficult before it gets to the point of burnout, and to find that balance between excelling and thriving, and to not tip too far one way or the other. And that's ultimately, it's about psychological safety. It's about, we need to try and create work environments where people are able to fail, where people can take kind of risks and not be criticised when things go wrong. So it's not just about being nice all the time. It's about being brave. and trying to understand the complexity of a workforce and people's lives and people's job roles, and accept the fact that sometimes people are going to fail, and that's okay. But most of all, it's about building positive relationships within a workforce. And if we can do all those things, we will create a workforce that's regulated and resilient. So improving workplace anxiety isn't just about reducing those demands that we mentioned earlier. That's not always possible. Sometimes workload is going to be high. But if you can create conditions that allow employees to feel resourced to cope with those demands for a period, then you're going to create a healthy and happier workforce. So changes in demand and policy are helpful, but most importantly, it's these kind of relational changes that make the difference. That is it from me. That's my whistle-stop tour to workplace anxiety. I am going to hand over now to Pete. He's going to talk about his experience of anxiety. So I will stop sharing my screen and allow Pete to share his.
Good morning, everybody. How to create anxiety in the workplace. Holding a Zoom meeting and asking me to share my screen. So just bear with me 1 minute. Okay. If somebody from the team can just give me a thumbs up. Have I shared the screen okay?
The wrong one, Pete. The one, yeah, I remember it's the other one.
1 moment. Sorry, guys. I'm
just glad it's not only me, Pete, don't worry.
Okay, how about
that? Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah, is that? Okay, good. Thank you very much. Right, so I'm just moving my screen around so I can see. Okay, good morning. As Helen said, I'm Pete Johnson. I'm Commercial Director for Platform Wellbeing, and this morning I'm very much taking my professional hat off for the next 10 minutes or so, as I've been invited to talk to you about my own experience of anxiety. It's really important, as Helen said at the very beginning. Some of what I'm going to talk about could bring up some emotions, and it may well bring up some emotions in me. I am fairly used to talking in public about this stuff, but sometimes at a moment my voice may shake, and whilst it's uncomfortable, I'm comfortable in sharing that with you. But if you feel that you need to step out, please do. There's some difficult topics coming up around suicide and grief, and so what I would urge you is to practice self-care, be aware of the space you're in, and please feel free. I'm not going to be offended. Step out if you need to. This is being recorded. If you feel that you want to catch up later afterwards, that's perfectly fine. Okay. I know that sometimes some of this stuff feels heavy, and it's really important to look after yourself. Okay, I have warned you. Okay, so when I think about my anxious mind, I'm going to share lots of selfies. As my friends will tell you, I'm a big selfie taker. So there's a lot of pictures with a lot of dodgy haircuts over the years. But when I'm thinking about my anxious mind and what I bring into the workplace, there's no real way of avoiding the root of many of my experiences. I'm 54 now. In 1971, when I was 15 months old, my mother took her life. There we go. There's the first shake. Leaving my dad behind with 3 young children. We didn't really talk about her as I grew up. And I wasn't really conscious of what it meant to have a mum. So unsurprisingly, perhaps, this had an impact on how I saw my place in the world. Okay, and I've practiced this a few times. I'm now kind of through that difficult bit. So I was a happy child. I had fun. You know, in the pictures, other than looking like Winston Churchill on the left, and clearly having not grown up with a mother with a haircut on the right, I engaged with the world. But there were periods when I was intensely frightened, and I have memories of that from being very young. Particularly, I would say, in situations where I felt I got something wrong, whether I had or not. There's some more dodgy haircuts. I remember as a teenager, I grew up in Cardiff, and I attended a drama club, which was a fantastic experience for me. Really created a community of people that I liked, and who I thrived with. But I remember one week there was a cassette tape that was really important for the production that we were doing next, and it had become lost. And for some reason, attached to my mind and the way that my mind worked, I took full blame for the loss of that tape. In fact, somebody had taken it home. So it wasn't lost. It had been misplaced. Somebody had done something with it. But I have this distinct memory as kind of 13, 14-year-old of that driving me into this stuff. So the stuff Sian has been talking about, I was in more than flight or fright. I was panicked. It felt like the end of the world for me. When I was 18, I left home to go to university at Sussex University in Brighton. And so my coping strategy, working with this feeling throughout my life, was to drink copious amounts of beer. And to be honest, I had a great time. It helped me fit into a social space. I had a lot of fun. And from the outside, you wouldn't think I had any particular difficulties. But I was masking those insecurities that I hadn't been able to process, and had yet really to be spoken about it at all in my life. Leaving university, I moved to London, got a job in London, and I for the 4 years that I was there, I partied hard. We moved there with a group of mates, and we hit the town every night for a number of years. But at 27, I got to a point of burning out, experiencing intense periods of panic, and to be honest, some pretty dark times. So thinking about flight or fright in the polyvagal theory, I practiced the polyvagal theory, and I ran away, and I ran back to my dad's for a short period of time. Kind of reset, sought some help, but then felt that the right thing to do was to immediately find my way back into work, which I did. I escaped the trappings of London life, moved into a work, performed well, settled in nicely, but regularly experienced the feeling of overwhelm, not knowing when to turn when unsure, and an exhausting sense of dread, impending doom that would lead to kind of periods every now and again of not being in work, of not being able to function, that freeze thing, that red zone. I kept hitting it. And I think my connection to the workplace has always been a critical part of me. So thinking about my dad's reaction after the loss of my mum, he kept us safe through work. That was the safety valve, was if we were secure financially, and if we had a place in work, that was the thing to do, and that was the safe place to be. And so work for me has always been a place to provide opportunities to find a place of belonging and a feeling of connection that was sometimes perhaps missing in my home life. It's a big narrative in my mind, but it brings those challenges that would back me into corners and really kick in the inner fight or flight instinct. I hope everybody's doing okay. And then, thankfully, during a period of stability, managed to create that. I got married, and believe it or not, I'm still married after 22 years. My wife very much needs a medal. We had our daughter, Millie. I knocked the beer on the head. And I thought at that stage, I had resolved those issues. I began to hit that thrive phase that Sian was talking about earlier. And then I got made redundant. And I'd grown into this job over 7 years that brought, the redundancy brought about just that anxiety feeling. So those overwhelmed feelings turned into huge panic attacks. I had a child, and my place in the world, my duty was to maintain the family home. And it was catastrophic for me. Okay. So over the years, I've sought all sorts of support. So I've done counselling of all the different flavours. I went to the GP, unsurprisingly, went to the GP, immediately put on pills. And really my kind of reflection on that, there was no real pathway of review. So I didn't go back. I'd spent quite a long time on antidepressants. Without checking in and going, what's happening in your life? What are we doing? And to a certain extent, whilst the effect of the pills took me to a place where I wasn't quite in danger, I was left to be on the pills, which reflecting on it wasn't a good thing for me to be in. Sought loads of therapy, been to see counselling at the time for some of those, and I would say that actually where it's been most helpful is where I've had a connection with the person rather than the modality of the therapy. It's kept me and taken me into a place where I could regulate and feel connected a little bit more and sort a few things out in my head. But I recognize it's something that doesn't fix the issue, and it's something that I need to return to. The Americans are great for going to therapy, and they're in therapy all their lives. It's not a thing I wouldn't recommend. I think, as part of Platform Wellbeing, we offer counselling and talking therapies at a time when you need somebody to talk to. And if that's an independent person, I'd recommend it. But it didn't fix the issue that I thought I had to fix. And in workplace, so bringing this back into work, I've experienced really difficult circumstances where the culture of support hasn't been readily available. And it felt that the reaction was more about removing a problem in an aid of productivity than supporting its team. I was referred to an occupational therapist at one stage, in one particular job, who thankfully reviewed the information they had and wrote the words crass mismanagement. And to me at the time, I've held on to that for a very long time since that happened, as hope that perhaps it wasn't just about me. This isn't about blame, so I'm not blaming my employers at the time if they weren't purposefully trying to make my life more difficult and remove me from the role. But through lack of experience, through lack of understanding and perhaps empathy, they certainly couldn't find a way of helping me. And it's also really important to me to remember the excellent workspaces I've had the pleasure to work in. I've worked with some teams where I felt comfortable, where the demands have been reasonable. They've been challenging, but they've been reasonable, and we've worked together as a team. So it's the spaces where I felt listened to, where I was given time to develop, and conversations held that were honest, collaborative, and straightforward. I think there is a real thing about when we're supported as emerging managers. So when we begin to work with people, do we ever receive that training that helps us work with people effectively, to consider where they've come from, what might be happening in their lives, and creating safe spaces for everyone to thrive? And then some really dramatic stuff happened about 10 years ago. So this is the stuff that's kind of the beginning of the stuff that led me to working with Platform. I'd met people who had been through a similar experience. In 45 years of my life, I'd never met people that had conversations who had gone through that bereavement by suicide. And then I saw a TV program one night, 11 o'clock at night on BBC Two at the time, that was called Life After Suicide, made by a now friend of mine, Angela Samata. He's a BAFTA nominated TV documentary. It is still available, I think, on YouTube. It's worth seeing if you're considering understanding that kind of thing, or you've been through similar things yourself. And it spoke about the impact of that let's call it trauma at the beginning of either at the beginning of people's lives or during people's lives. And I didn't feel quite so alone. And over the years, Angela has put me in front of people. We've become friends, and I often talk about my experiences. And believe it or not, for the very first experience that I had, the first time I spoke about my bereavement and the reaction of that grief and the complexity of it was to Prince William and his wife, as they were putting together the Heads Together campaign. So I sat with a collective of people talking for the very first time to royal. I'm not a great royalist. I'm not interested in their privilege and all this kind of stuff. But this stuff blew my mind. And since then, I've spoken at conferences, the Suicide Bereavement Conference in Manchester that happens in September, which is a fantastic collective of people making a difference. I delivered the keynote there a couple of years ago. And more recently, I've taken part in an arts project. There's an arts agency called Heart of Glass, based in St Helens, who are putting together a project called the Suicide Chronicles, which talks about the language we use, about how we communicate about this really difficult subject. There's an artist called Mark Storer who I collaborated with on one of the chapters of that project. It's worth seeing, and when they finish the final piece, it'll be an amazing bit of work that will really speak the truth about such a difficult thing. Now, all of these experiences that I've had over the last 10 years that have led me into the job with Platform haven't been therapy, but they have been hugely therapeutic. And what all of them have done have created that space for me to think and to work through my place in the world. And that's both in work and out of work. They've given me the courage to be more open, both in work, and ultimately led to the conversations with my father before he passed away. Were in 2019, important conversations that were 50 years in the making. Sorry. So what I would say, I'm coming to a close shortly. When working with people experiencing any kind of anxiety, any kind of distress, this isn't, we're labeling this anxiety, but this could be depression. This could be any kind of neurodivergence. It's about considering our place in the world. The act of compassion is the best thing a workplace can provide, to enable space and time to sit with a distress rather than immediately searching to fix or indeed remove, because that does happen. From that grows confidence, trust, loyalty, and hope. And I think that's something we all need. I continue now to live with an anxious mind. but I now have a greater understanding of the warning signs when I need to pay more attention to myself. So sleep is a huge sign when I begin to lose sleep. And, you know, when you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and you're just ruminating, you can't switch off the brain. That's a real warning sign. I have to pay close attention. So I knocked the beer on the head and I replaced it with huge packets of Monster Munch, to be honest. I really need to be conscious about what I'm eating to maintain kind of that health and to live a better, more healthy lifestyle. And I also recognise I withdraw from my social circles. I don't have huge numbers of friends. I'm not a big socialite these days, but I do have close friends. And when I feel myself cancelling plans, I know there's some work to do that I need to do on myself. I show all of these pictures that you've seen as a way of saying you never know what's happening in people's lives. You know, all of these pictures are happy, smiling faces. Anxiety isn't always obvious. It can show itself in many forms, in communication, in physical ill health, in habits, in communication, and also in creating, to be honest, ambition and drive. That's what's brought me to speak to you today. I hope that the work that Platform, and specifically my platform wellbeing team undertakes in working alongside organisations will help to develop these kind of conversations, considering workmates as a collective of experiences and embracing them to create thriving communities. I need to recognise also that I am a white, straight man, and eventually having access to some disposable income gave me the privilege beyond the reach of many people. They allow me the opportunity to explore and to discover more readily than others without my privilege. And we need to look at ourselves when we think of that and how we reach out to the people that can't access this kind of stuff. I don't think it's any wonder, you know, at the beginning of Sian's presentation, she says anxiety is normal. Is it any wonder that we live in a more anxious world with everything that's happening around us? By sticking together as a community, we have a chance to navigate stormy times together. And the two things that I leave you with, the most important thing is I keep having to remind myself, it is never too early to have the conversations you need to have, but probably more importantly, it is never too late. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Pete. That was very emotional listening to that, and I appreciate you being so brave as to share that with everyone today. That's something that's very powerful, and I imagine there'll be people on this webinar now that will be hugely resonating with. So just let's take a breath. And yeah, I just have some further questions for yourself and Sian about this subject. But obviously, before I start with that, just to remind people, if you do have questions that you'd like to ask Pete and Sian today, then do pop them in the chat, or as I say, pop your hand up. And Rach, our wonderful marketing officer in the background, keeping an eye on what's going on, so she'll be able to bring those questions forth to us shortly. So, Pete, are you ready for a question?
I am. I did say at the beginning, before everybody was arriving, I'm going to make a couple of people cry, I think.
You did.
I didn't mean to make you cry, Helen. Sorry.
I was close. That was close. I'll keep that lump down. I'll keep that lump down. Right. So, well, in the course of your talk there, you did talk about coping mechanisms. You've touched on how throughout your life, you know, you've used coping measures, be them good or bad. Drinking, probably not the good one, masking behaviours, seeking therapy, and then later in life, that community peer-to-peer support. It feels like you've been on quite a journey in terms of framing solutions from almost an inward-looking point of view, that, you know, the problem was with me, I need to fix myself, to that more open, outward-facing view of I actually need to reach out to those around me and just talk about it. Can you give a bit more information about that journey, about that, that kind of journey to healing almost, I imagine?
Yeah, and it's a never-ending journey, to be honest. I don't think it'll ever be over, particularly with the complexity of kind of the story. I think reflecting on it, culturally, so what the culture I grew up in was work is the most important thing. And when I began to have challenges, conversation between my father and me at the time was, for God's sakes, don't tell people that about your mental health. That will end your career. I'm thankful that I managed to break through that cycle, and I think my dad got it towards the end as well. So I think recognizing that, and from what you were just saying, when I have the courage to bring other people into the conversation, it's almost like a mess of wires in my head due to the complexity of some of the stuff, that when I do, so for example, when I do this kind of thing, it's painful to do, it causes a little bit of distress, but I feel like that I've ironed out that tangle of wires and just untangled them a bit, like your Christmas lights at Christmas when you put them in the box and then get them out again. I've untangled a bit, and then I feel a bit of, if we call it healing, bit of a hippie word, but I'm happy to use it. Bit of the healing takes place, and perhaps when I put it back in the box, it's not as tangled as before. And I think what I reflect, so in terms of habits, health wise, self-care, we talk about a lot of self-care. Self-care is really important. I need to eat properly, I need to do exercise. I've got a dog and he takes me out twice a day. It's really, really good for me and helps me. But actually, I think ultimately the connection and the conversations that I have help me the most. And we spend most of our lives in work, and that's where you've really got to hone in on getting that right, I think. I don't know if that answers your question, Helen.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. I was going to ask about the stigma of sharing, whether you felt that that's been a positive thing in your life or not, and you kind of touched on the fact that actually that really has.
Yeah, I was scared about it, but ultimately I became so ill that I went, sod it.
Yeah.
I need to talk about this stuff, which kind of then empowers, and I hope by talking about this stuff empowers other people to consider talking about it, not necessarily publicly, but to consider even reaching out to a friend and having a conversation, saying, actually, when you ask me if I'm all right, I'm not actually all right, and I need to talk about this stuff. Or indeed talking to a stranger. I was talking about therapy, reaching out for counselling or talking therapy or whatever it is, whatever is available. And I know that's challenging because it costs money.
Yeah. And also, I mean, you said, anxiety, it's always there. It's a lifelong experience. It's how you then work with it. But what have you, what have you learned? What do you wish you could have told yourself at the beginning, when you were kind of trying potentially harmful solutions to try and cope with it? I mean, what would you now, knowing what you know now, what would you wish that you'd kind of had said to yourself?
Yeah, so as a team, we did some training together a while ago, didn't we, on compassionate focused therapy. We sat with one of our psychologists, Kieran, to work through this stuff. And I think the headline stuff from that I bring into my brain in terms of my life experiences is it's not your fault. And I think if we can take that, because none of the stuff that happens to us is our fault, and if we can show ourselves compassion for ourselves as well as for others, I think we're a long way to fixing small problems in a slow, steady way, one step forward. Yeah.
Okay. I think I might bring Sian in now, if I may, and pose a question to yourself, Sian. So in the course of your presentation, you talked about organisations and leaders and how what they can do to foster a better environment for employees who are experiencing anxiety, such as compassionate leadership, creating that psychological safety. But given this approach is still possibly not the norm amongst most organisations and most employers, what would be a good starting point for sort of those organisations or employers who recognise their role in supporting staff but don't really know where to begin? What would you kind of start with advice-wise?
It's a huge topic, isn't it? And it's very complex. There's lots to it. There's lots to relationships in general, and then you add kind of power dynamics and the workplace into the mix, and it gets very, very complex. But I think at the very core of it, and I think it reflects what Pete was saying, is it's about those one-to-one relationships and those conversations. So, you know, as an employer, as a colleague, if you can be brave in your interactions, ask the questions, listen to what someone's saying, and yeah, don't try and provide a fixing solution. So often we speak about our mental health, and it's you know, go and do some mindfulness, go and take a walk, go and have a bath, those kind of things. Was actually the connection itself is the most powerful thing, and it can feel uncomfortable to start with, but it makes a huge difference. So I think that's a really powerful starting point. But yeah, it's a huge topic, and that's why we do what we do. It's why we offer the training that we offer. It's why we run kind of 2-hour, 3-hour, half day, full day, multiple long day courses on this topic. Because there's a lot to sit down and unpick and reflect on, and that's how change really happens. But the relationships are the key component to it all, so I'd say that's the place to start.
Yeah.
Can I chip in there, Helen?
Oh, sorry, Pete. Yes, you can.
I think just the reflection on my own kind of experiences of various jobs is that we fall into a trap of immediately signposting to services that are difficult to access anyway. So there is an element that Sian was talking about of being comfortable, being brave enough to sit with some of the distress. It doesn't mean we have to become therapists. It doesn't mean that we have to. The important thing is that we don't try and fix it. That we're encouraging that human connection, because ultimately that is the bit that will make the difference to give people the space to then get themselves regulated into a regulated area where they can begin to thrive. You do that kind of stuff, you create loyalty, you create connection, and the journey changes. Yeah,
certainly. So I think, given we're running 5-2, Rach, have we had any questions come through from the chat at all?
We haven't had any questions. We've got a lot of comments and a lot of love, Pete, just saying, you know, thank you for sharing your story, and that was so brave, very inspiring. There's a lot of people relating to what you say as well. Thank you, Pete, for your courage you've shown sharing your story. It's really appreciated. Keep on being the amazing person you obviously are. There's a comment from Jack. I will always tell people I'm all right, even though I'm broken inside. You try and be brave at work.
Yeah.
Which, you know, I think kind of touches on what we were talking about.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's no questions. It's just comments within the chat.
Yeah, no, I think we all feel that support for Pete. So and that bravery. I think what we'll do then, I'll just start winding up the I'm going to share my screen. Sorry, 2 seconds. And there we are. So sorry guys, I knew this, so this is my anxiety now kicking in. My questions on the other, I've got multiple screens. Let me just try that again. 2 seconds. From current slide. Right, okie doke. Can you see my screen, Rach? Yeah.
No.
You can't see it. Okay. Sorry. Share screen. Try that again. Okay, can you see it now?
No. Yes. Yes.
Oh, thank goodness. Okay. So yeah, I just wanted to end today's session. I think Sian just touched upon, you know, what we do offer in terms of support with this kind of thing for organisations that perhaps, like I say, do recognise that they have a role in supporting their employers with anxiety in the workplace. Sian offers a 2-hour workshop that goes into a bit more depth, obviously, about this very subject, because it is a big subject. But also we run regular training in understanding mental health. If I can just squeeze through, there we are. And we really go into some depth about taking that relational approach that she's touched on a little today, talking about the role of workplaces in creating that environment of psychological safety that helps reduce sort of many of the causal factors of anxiety. So yeah, it really explores the foundations of what good mental health looks like and how we can create safety, that purpose, that connection, having good relationships and feeling that we really belong in the workplace. So if anyone's interested in any of those training areas, then please do get in touch. I will point you towards my colleague Mary Rogers, who's our business development manager, and there's her contact details there if you wanted to reach out on any of those subjects. And then lastly, we just would love to hear your feedback on these webinars. We run them bi-monthly, and we really want them to be useful. So if you do have any feedback, a copy of all these slides will be going out to you after the webinar, as well as a recording of today's webinar for future reference, or if you want to forward on to colleagues who weren't able to make it today. So please do take a couple of minutes, if you can, to give us some feedback on what you thought. And then just lastly to say, as I say, we do run these as a bi-monthly wellbeing webinars, and our next one will be on the 14th of March, Thursday the 14th of March, 11 o'clock, and it's actually going to be covering in a lot more depth the idea of what is compassionate leadership. We touched on it a little bit today, but you know, what is it, how and why should we seek to achieve it? And in doing that, we'll be joined by Platform CEO Ewan Hilton, who will also be taking us through an honest and open approach to discussing his experience of implementing compassionate leadership within the charity, the Platform charity itself, which we're all undergoing a bit of a journey. So yeah, we're looking forward to sharing some of that with you at the next webinar if you can make it. But I think I'm a little bit early actually. I don't know if you've got anything to add, Pete and Sian, before we say cheerio.
No, just thank you for people for listening. I realise I take people through a bit of a ringer there, but that's the point of it. So I really appreciate people's ears and the kind thoughts. So thank you very much. Yeah,
definitely. Okay. Well, thanks very much, everyone, and I hope you have a good rest of your day, and hopefully we'll see you again at our next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.